Legends. My guest is a very special man. His name is James Carville. He is a Louisianian who is the chief strategist for Governor Clinton's campaign to win the presidency of the United States. In other words, this Louisianian, James Carville, is the man calling the shots in this campaign. So what that means is that one of us could well be in a position of staggering influence should the Clinton campaign be successful. Tonight I hope that all of us can learn about James Carville and Louisiana, and then later on about what's it like to direct the strategy for this monumental undertaking called a presidential campaign. James, welcome home.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here, Gus. With that kind of introduction, I'll come back often.
Though we're only going to ask you once. We have Ms. Quayle going to... James, let me ask you, what was it like to grow up in Carville, Louisiana? And there's a reason I ask. Carville, of course, is the home of the United States hospital that once treated Hansen's disease or leprosy, which is the disease of biblical yore and fear. As you remember, in ancient days, lepers were forced to wear bells. The word leprosy isn't even used anymore. But what was it like a kid grew up in proximity to that hospital?
Well, it was fun growing up. I had a good time. I mean, I never really thought about it very much. I mean, well, most of the people were employed, and my daddy was a postmaster in Carville, and used to always say we were the only third-class post office in the United States with a branch, so it gave us some distinction. But it was, very rural. I mean, I could ride a horse before I could ride a bicycle, and did the things I guess that a child in the country would do. Growing up in the 50s, I had the oldest of 8 children, so I always had a lot of brothers and sisters around, and had some friends, and I had I think a remarkably happy childhood. It was a great place to grow up.
Tell us about Chester Carville, your late father. Kind of sum him up for us.
Well, I mean, I think of my daddy sometimes. I think of Atticus Finch. I mean, he had that sort of quiet dignity. He had a presence about him. He was a very kind man. He was a very gentle man, and he liked living in the country. He liked being a sort of part of the community there. He was active in the American Legion and active in the Catholic Church there and things like that. But I think he was a man that was primarily concerned with his family and their happiness and their well-being, and he was quite content and quite happy to be a participant in his community and family life. And I think as a result of that, all of us grew up sort of pretty happy. I guess when sometimes you think of what you look at the Republican convention and they talk about family values and the American family, I thought they were talking about us there for a little while. I didn't know the Democrats were any different.
I don't think they meant the Carville family at all.
I don't know what they were talking about.
James, now let's talk about a remarkable woman and probably the dominant influence, as I see it, in your life, one Miss Nippy Carville, mother, a cookbook writer extraordinaire, a character out of a novel, and generally great lady. What about Miss Nippy?
Well, I mean, I think that, I think in my life, the big thing, she always gave me a sense of confidence. And she has a tremendous amount of energy, and I think that, in this world, confidence and energy can take you a long way. I think if you have that combination, I would rather have that than a lot of other qualities that people bring to the table. And I think when you have growing up in a home that had a strong mother, I mean, I think now working in campaigns and being out in the world, the world's a lot different now. I mean, there are probably more women that work in our campaign than men. And when that transition started coming about in the 70s, it was a very easy transition for me to make to really adjust and understand that women were not part of the workforce. Now there are almost more women working, and in political campaigns, more in sort of higher places and stuff like that. So I think it having that kind of a role model of growing up like that gave me a good perspective for that sort of transition, particularly in the line of work I do. And I think that Mama also, in a campaign, you can't look back. I mean, every morning you get up and you got to make a decision, and you got Time Magazine and Newsweek and NBC and CBS and McNeil Lear and everybody else in the world second-guessing everything that you do, or wondering if you did the right thing. And, all you know is you got to get up the next morning and fight another day. And, you're going to have some good days and bad days, and you got to try to understand that and get out there and fight a little harder.
Now, James, Miss Nippy was more than just a homemaker, though. You saw her do some work, too, didn't you?
Well, we had 8 children, and my daddy was a postmaster, and we had a country store, and people had to go to college and get educated, so my mother started selling encyclopedias I would ride around the car with. And one of the things we'd do, we'd look and see if there was a bass boat, a fishing boat, and some bicycles in the same house, and she would go in, and bicycles were the key that there was a child there. The fishing boat was the key that they'd invested some money in recreation, and so she would tell the people, if you have enough money to invest in your recreation fishing, you ought to have a couple $100 or whatever set encyclopedias in cost for your children's education. And she had, I guess, a high completion ratio or whatever you call it. She closed the deal a lot.
Where did you go to grammar school?
I went the first 5 years. I went to St. Gabriel Public School down in St. Gabriel, Louisiana. In the 6th and 7th grade, I went to St. Joe's Parochial, which, of course, no longer exists, but it was on the corner of North Street and, I guess, 4th Street. It was right where, right there. It's now where the Department of Education building is. I went there in the 6th and 7th grade. And then from the 8th to the 12th grade, I went to Ascension Catholic High School in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, where I graduated from high school in 1962 there.
Why so much movement? You were a good student and a good kid, I know.
Well, it's just only 3 schools. I went to public school.
In 2 years.
My folks were good Catholics, and my father went to Catholic High in Baton Rouge, and I think they wanted us to have a Catholic education, so I went to, actually the reason is that there was some other people from down home that went to Catholic High, which at that time was also downtown it was on North Street. And so I had a ride, but when he graduated, I was in the 8th grade, was too young to drive, and actually the brothers took about 10, 15 boarders in Donaldsonville, so I started going to school and playing sports and decided to go and stay there.
Then began a career of academic excellence. You entered Louisiana State University. Can you kind of encapsulate that for us, gently?
Well, I could say that they invited me back to give some kind of a talk to a journalism class, and I said, this university inviting me back is like, you know, to teach a class would be like Rome inviting Nero back to be the fire chief.
Your academic career was
undistinguished. Let's put it this way. I tell people that, you know, that really Bush outdid me. He picked the only person in America that had worse grades than me to be his vice president. That was Dan Quayle. He picked the only person in America who was worse lawyer than me, and that was Clarence Thomas to be on the Supreme Court. So.
Then you decided that, or life probably decided for you, that perhaps the United States Marine Corps might add some little element to James Carville. Am I correct?
Yeah, I went in the Marines, and after uncompleted and undistinguished academic career at LSU.
How was that experience, the Marines?
Well, it was a good experience. I mean, I still to this day, you know, I was fortunate. I mean, look, I was in there during the time of the Vietnam War, and I stayed in, my orders was, I mean, I was ready to go wherever I was sent, but I stayed in California, and you know, you go, and I've only been able to go to that wall one time.
Did you learn anything in the Marines? Did it add anything to your character?
Sure. I mean, I think
discipline, perhaps.
Yeah, discipline, and you know, you learned how to. You know, it was the first time. Look, it was the first time I'd been out. I'd been to like Biloxi or something. We'd go for a couple of days vacation, and at the time that I went there, that might have been, other than going to Mississippi, it was the first time that I'd ever left Louisiana. I really believe that was the case. I was 33 years old before I went to New York or Washington, so. You know, my roots are pretty deep here in the. Then
you get out of the Marines, and
right.
What did you do then?
I went back and finished undergraduate school, and then finished law school.
In education, didn't you?
Well, I actually finished in history, but I taught school while I taught school in St. James Parish, and what they call South Vacherie, I guess, is the sort of politically correct name for it. We used to call it Back Vacherie down there, and I taught the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade during the day while I was finishing going to get my undergraduate degree.
How'd you like that? Teaching.
It was as good a year as I've ever had, I think, and I know that when this is over, in some form or another, whether it's high school or college or graduate school or something like that, what I really want to do is go back to teaching.
That's not a hint to Vacherie to reemploy you.
I wouldn't mind. I tell you, Vacherie there were some great people there, and it was a great year that I spent in my life, and I wouldn't, of all of the places I've been, and I say this in all candor, I don't know a place that I would rather be than Louisiana. I mean, it just so happens that fate and my career, you know, have dictated that I have to make other choices. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas now, which I'm enjoying immensely. I think sometimes there's some truth to thinking the grass is always green on the other side of the fence, and sure, I've lived in probably 10, 12 different places in the last 10 years. And, you know, I've been very fortunate and met governors, senators, presidential candidates, or whatever. But, you know, there's nothing like home, and I hope that I'm able to come back one day. Maybe I can teach somewhere here in Louisiana. I don't know. If I'm unable to, then that'll be the case. But if I'm able to, so much the better.
So, James, how in the world, and I have a reason for asking this, how in the world did you decide to go to law school? And later on, folks, I'll explain why I asked that so incredulously.
Well, I guess people just said, you know, James, he's always been able to talk. He's got a good mouth. He ought to be a lawyer. It just was sort of seemed like a natural thing to do. I don't know if I ever had a real sort of burning passion to be a lawyer, but I went to law school, and it was and made a whole lot of friends there. And Doug Morrow, who's now the district attorney in East Baton Rouge Parish, we and I were probably as good of friends as I got. We were roommates the whole time we were in law school, and I talked to Mr. George Pugh, who has taught me probably 3 or 4 classes. I talked to him last week. He wrote me a letter giving me some strategic advice. And, you know, friends all over Louisiana that I made when I was in law school.
But there never was a burning passion for the law in you, from what I could determine.
No, I don't think that. You know, I'm found what I like to do, you know, relatively late in life. I managed my first campaign in 1982, which meant I was 38 years old on election night, and that was in Virginia. But, I mean, I learned a lot, and I had a chance to meet a lot of nice people, and I think that legal training gives you a perspective, a way to look at things, but not a dominant perspective. Most people don't think like lawyers. Most people think like people.
What would you go along with this statement that there's something either in our drinking water or air in Louisiana that attracts kids, boys and girls, to politics?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I can't, this is a theory. I'll put it out there. There's a great oral tradition here. There's a great lust and love for entertainment. And it's been said, and I mean, part in jest, but I guess there's a grain of truth to it. We expect our politicians to entertain us as much as we do to lead us. Unfortunately, we've probably been entertained more than we've been led. But what the heck, we get some good laughs. And we have a strong governor state, and we've had some sort of colorful people. You know, one of the things that in this sort of most anti-political of all eras, I like politicians. I like to be around them. I find them fascinating, interesting people. I find them, by and large, pretty honest, pretty hard-working. Most of them, I know, if you cut them, they bleed. Most of them care about people. Sure, they want to get elected. Sure, they're more ambitious than most of us, but they're risk takers. I mean, there's nothing like, I mean, I couldn't even begin in a week sitting here to tell you what it's been like to go through some of the things we've gone in this presidential campaign, but I've managed campaigns for 3 governors, 2 senators, and I think one of the things that I could import to somebody watching this show, if you knew what I knew, if you knew the people that I knew, and you knew them on the level and as close as I did, and you had a chance to observe them, you would think that they were pretty decent people. You would not think they were perfect people. You would not think that they're people who are incapable of error or anything like that. But I think in my contact with politicians, by and large, I've run across some people that I don't think a lot of, but by and large, it's been one of the most positive experiences of my life. I really mean that.
How did you get interested then in formally working in political campaigns in Louisiana?
I think that you were probably my mentor when I was practicing law, and it was, I don't want to say I was unhappy, but I just didn't feel like I was fulfilling what I could do in life, and I started hanging out at your office, and, you know, finally think you felt sorry for me and gave me a check, and I sort of sat and talked to you and listened to you and picked up things, and, you know, hung around your feet for a year or two and, you know, picked up some tips and stuff like that. And I think the main thing that you learn, and it is the hardest thing to learn, is you have to think like people. And I think that's what I learned from Gus Weill. You have to think like people think. You can't theorize, and this is not to people, politics and what government does is not abstract. I tell people, say anything you want about politics and politicians. Think of how much they control your life. They determine how fast you drive. They determine how much tax you pay. heck, they even determine if you can live or die, euthanasia laws, or whatever. They determine if you get in trouble, what the penalty, the fine. I mean, very little, even in this most free of all nations, still politicians determine a whole lot about our lives. So it's really an important thing. And people understand that, and they constantly, maybe this year more than ever, feel a sense, and I think justifiably, of alienation and frustration for government. They don't believe that their government and their leaders really understand what they go through in everyday lives. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but what I try to do when I'm in an election is, to the best of my ability, to try to look at the election through the eyes of the way a voter looks at the election, and try to think about their concerns and what they're worried about. Not the way that the press looks at it. They have a whole different agenda. I'm not saying they're not nice people in the press, but they're looking for something new. They're looking for something different. They're looking for a point of conflict. They're looking for something that fulfills their definition of news. Most people out there are really kind of looking for hope. They're looking for somebody that understands what they go through, I think, and they have realistic expectations of politics and politicians. And I mean, I think that I've certainly been guilty of it. Everybody has. They tend to overpromise. I don't think anybody thinks that a politician is going to come along and change the country or change the world overnight. But I think that they do think that government has sort of failed them and gotten away from them, and they'd like to sort of, they know that government is going to, in large part, be influenced by special interests and people not like them, but I think they'd like to see it turn a little bit more toward them.
So, James, you decide to leave Louisiana and seek your fortunes as a political consultant. I gather the world did not beat a path to your motel room.
No, they didn't beat a path anyway. First race I did after I left your firm, I went up to Virginia. I worked in the mayor's office here for Mayor Screen for 16 months, and then after that I left and I went up to Virginia and managed a campaign in 1982, of which we lost by 1% or 2%. And I spent a lot of time staying at the phone waiting on it to ring. And then got my next job. I worked for like 3 or 4 months for Gary Hart's ill-fated 1983 presidential campaign. That was not to distinguish, during 83, it was the 84 campaign, as distinguished from the 88 campaign. And then I took a job in 1983 working for a man named Lloyd Doggett in Texas. So I went out and ran his campaign, and then it lost again. So
Question. After this series of losses, you're a young man, you're striking out, make your fortune in this very peculiar field of political consulting. Did you begin to doubt that, my God, maybe I should be a lawyer? Because losses, as you and I know, they have an effect on the consultant too.
Sure.
We also bleed.
I was scared to death.
Yeah.
When I was 40 years old, I mean, didn't have health insurance. I didn't have anything. I didn't have any money. I was mortified. I was, and I took a job in 1986 working for a man named Bob Casey, who was then running for governor of Pennsylvania. This is his 4th time running. He had lost 3 times in a row. And
why did he hire you, given your record and his?
Well, I guess we were the only 2 people in America that had each other.
You were the only people in America between you had 6 losses,
yeah.
right? And so you run Casey's campaign.
Right, and I was 42 years old, and we won that race, and just by a percentage point. But I mean, it was the biggest percentage point I've ever seen anywhere in my life. And
how relieved were you?
Ooh, I mean, I don't think I've ever had anything, any kind. I don't think anybody has been 42 years old, and this would have been the 3rd loss. I mean, I would have been out. I would have left the practice of law, have moved around the country, had been 42 years old, and probably been the biggest loser in American politics. Then I think my professional life clearly
Then
turned
what
around.
happened after the Casey campaign? What did you handle next?
Next campaign I went to work on was a guy named Wallace Wilkinson, who was running for governor of Kentucky, and we used to count interviews. He wasn't at a percentage point in the polls, and he was running against John Wire Brown, remember the Kentucky Fried Chicken man, married to Phyllis Miss America, and he was way ahead. And by, I don't know, guile, luck, and I hope a little bit of skill, we won that race in almost a landslide. We came from 0 to win the race, and I think we set margins for victory in Kentucky in that race. Then after that race, I went to work in 1988 for Senator Frank Lautenberg of New Jersey, who was running against Pete Dawkins, who was remember the Heisman Trophy winner?
Heisman Trophy.
Right, right. And we were able to win that race pretty decisively. That was a race that the Republicans had really targeted, and we were pretty Bush was beating Dukakis in New Jersey pretty bad, so we were pretty fortunate to win that race. Then in 1989, I did a race for man run for mayor of Houston, of which we lost. And then in 1990, I ran the campaigns of Governor Zell Miller in Georgia, who won, and also did Governor Casey's re-election. And in 91, Senator Harris Wofford, who we can...
Now, there was the race, I guess, where you really established your credentials as the best in the business. Wofford was what and who? He was running for the United States?
Well, he was running against Senator John Heinz of the Heinz Ketchup family from Pittsburgh, was tragically killed in an airplane accident in suburban Philadelphia. Governor Casey, who was my client, had to make an appointment. If you remember, that's when, actually I went with him and met Iacocca, sat in his office. We interviewed Iacocca to see if he'd be interested. He was from Allentown, running for the United States Senate from Pennsylvania. And, you know, after that meeting, he went on Larry King Live. Most phone calls I ever got. And he said, you know, I met a guy, James Carville, and he was one of the brightest people I met. I'm people I went to high school and everything. Oh, man, I saw you on TV. I saw Iacocca was on TV last night. Said, you really met him.
What an advertisement.
Right, right. And he decided that he wasn't interested in. The governor was a longtime friend of Harris Wofford, who was then Secretary of Labor in Pennsylvania. But he is one of the most interesting men that I've ever worked for, probably one of the most interesting men in America. You know, he studied with Gandhi in India in the 40s. He and his wife, they wrote a book called India Fire. He was one of, I think, 5 people that Martin Luther King asked to march in the front line from Selma to Montgomery. He was a founder of the Peace Corps. It was actually the deputy director. It was his idea. He was a person that got John F. Kennedy to call Coretta Scott King when Martin Luther King was in jail, and at that time the black vote was actually more trending Republican and Democratic. That is credited with that single thing was probably the most thing that got the black vote within the Democratic Party.
But who was his opposition going to be in this race? Was
Dick Thornburgh, who was the Attorney General of the United States, 2-time former governor of Pennsylvania, who was very powerful. He had a 47-point lead when we started, and through I think we had.
Give that again. When the campaign started, Thornburgh's lead was what?
47 points.
47
it was
points. That means give up, folks. Insurmountable. Go home. Don't waste another dollar. 47 points.
And that was, I mean, we were fortunate that we had a great candidate, and we had a lot of discipline, and I think we also were fortunate that the opposition thought that they had it made, and he'd been twice governor, and he was Attorney General. And at the time that all this happened, President Bush was still very popular. He was still riding on the aftermath of the Persian Gulf War. And it was the race that sort of shook America. I mean, it was like, that was and he won big. We won by 10, 11 points, I think. We got 55% of the vote. And he was the first Democratic senator ever elected in Pennsylvania since Joe Clark, who was defeated in 1968. So from 1968 to 1991, I think I'm right. Yes, I'm pretty sure Pennsylvania was exclusively represented by Republicans. But that was the race that sort of changed the dynamic, if you will, for the 1992 presidential race. And that was when President Bush canceled his trip to Japan, changed his position on unemployment compensation. I mean, it didn't send a tremor through the White House. I mean, it was a 8-point Richter scale earthquake, big time, right?
James, after that victory, I recall us talking on the telephone and my saying, now you're going to have your choice of presidential candidates. It's obvious. You were, as you remain, the hottest thing in American politics. And you did indeed interview with several candidates. And as much as Governor Clinton selected James Carville, because you had a choice, and Clinton was, with all due respects, just another candidate. He was far from being the Democratic nominee. Now, my question is this. What appealed to you about this governor from Arkansas that made you select him over the other candidates with whom you interviewed?
I mean, very few times in your life you see the potential for real greatness, and you could see when he walks in a room. I mean, now there's having the potential for greatness. I mean, he has to be elected and he has to serve. I don't know. But, I mean, you think part of it was that I had the sense that there was something special about him, but I also knew George Stephanopoulos and David Wilhelm and people that were working for him. The people that were working for him really wanted me aboard the campaign. And I think it was probably the fact that he was from Arkansas and I was from Louisiana. I mean, I still have some sort of Southern pride here. I mean, and he was I had, so a combination of things.
Now, James, you told me at the time that it was very important to you, not just the candidate, but the people around the candidate. That is, that palace armed guard that you have to wade through and fight your way through to get to the candidate in many campaigns. And that was very important to you, was it not?
It was extremely important to me because I knew I would be coming in an existing organization, wherever I went. I knew that we were coming off of a big win in Pennsylvania. And Paul Begala, who's my partner and one of my best friends and everything, and I knew that I was kind of the hot shot at the time. I mean, there's a lot of publicity and profiles and TV shows and that type of stuff. So you got to be realistic. You walk into a different organization that not everybody there will wish you well,
Slightly.
And George Stephanopoulos, who I work with every day, who's probably one of the most, I told the New York Times, put in the paper, I said if you convert his IQ to Fahrenheit, his brain would boil water. He and David Wilhelm and people I knew and respected, and I think that is, quite honestly, one of the things that has helped me and has helped this campaign is we still to this day, as far as the campaign goes, there's some friction, et cetera, and I think that's a real tribute to Governor Clinton that he was able to put these people together.
Because a campaign with people surrounding the candidate can be a nightmare campaign.
Oh, I mean, and just you have no idea what
egos.
In a presidential campaign, it's just.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering, but a lot of the credit goes to the governor. I mean, he just doesn't. He is turned off by that kind of stuff, and if you have something to say, he'll listen to you. He'll take what you say seriously, and I think that we have had a lot less of that. I mean, certainly we've had some. I wouldn't tell you that there hadn't been friction within the campaign. I mean, no organization that big can go without that. But we've been fortunate, and I think that really has as much to do with him and the kind of people that he hired and the way he expects his staff to lead and act. And
is he an easy man to talk to?
Very, very. He is very, very human. He came down to New Orleans, and my brother works for the Department of Corrections here in Louisiana. He's a probation and parole officer, and he called and said he wanted to go down and meet Clinton. And I talked to him that morning. I think they were in Dallas, if I remember correctly. And I said, look, I know you're going to have, and this was like $5,000 fundraiser. So it was the type of thing, and it was between the conventions, and we were at the house. I said, would you do me a favor? My brother's going to be down there. If you can acknowledge him, maybe spend a couple seconds with him. And I saw him maybe a day or two later. He was back in Little Rock, and I worked in. The first thing he says, hey, man, I talked to Bill. I got a chance to spend, 4 or 5 minutes with him. Now, 4 or 5 minutes for a presidential candidate at a big fundraiser, that's eternity. And that was the first, and he was very pleased that he had a chance to talk to him. And that was the first, he didn't say, well, boy, we raised X gazillion dollars there, or
so
we had a good day.
So there's very much that human element.
Yes, as much as anybody. Not just as much as any candidate I work for, but probably as much as any human being that I know. He has there's a real quality of humanness about him. There's a real sort of quality of concern for people. I mean, to some extent it works to his detriment. He'll chronically get behind schedule when they do these bus trips, and there'll be a road stop. There'll be 200-300 people stop there, and he won't pass them up. He said, look, and people will look at that and they'll say, now, isn't that a chronic politician? They have 200-300 hands to shake, and he's going to stop there. What he's got a whole staff saying, the heck with them, man. The cameras are there. We got to beat a lot. He said, well, no, these people have been waiting for 2 hours to see me. It's rude to pass them by. And to a lot of people, that's a big thing in their lives, and that's the way sometimes people look at it, in the way that and many times a politician will look at it through the eyes of people, and that's just a small example, but that's the way it works. Let
me ask you a question now. When you signed on, the primaries had not begun yet.
Right.
What did you think his chances were to get the nomination?
I thought that he was. I thought he was an extraordinary candidate, and I wouldn't be candid and say I like to win. these things, you know, and I thought he would have a pretty good chance. I mean, it was a formidable field. You had Senator Kerry, who's Medal of Honor winner in Vietnam, very able man. Saunders, who turned out to be a articulate candidate with a pretty clear message. Tom Harkin, Senator Harkin, who is a great guy from Iowa, who had a good traditional Democratic kind of podium-thumping message in that race. I mean, I thought we had a pretty good chance. There's no guarantees, and we had some tough moments.
Now I want to talk to you about those tough moments, as unpleasant as they may be, because in the flush of present victory and the hope of future victory.
Well, they're coming back. We tape. I don't know when this thing is, but I guarantee you that they'll all be back.
Governor Clinton was rolling along, and suddenly here stands a woman named Jennifer Flowers making accusations of an affair. On top of that came further accusations of dodging the draft. How did it hit the campaign? How did it hit you personally? How did you keep your head? How did he keep his head?
Well, I mean, it sure hit us. I mean, there's no, I think you learn something about somebody.
How did he stand up under that?
Unbelievable. The thing really hit, I mean, it hit before we were in Louisiana. If I get the sequence of events right, I think that this woman, who I must say it, who was paid $500,000, excuse me, I think it was $175,000. They made over $500,000, $750,000 on the publication of this supermarket tabloid, which was that's what happened. Somebody got paid by a supermarket tabloid, and they put it on there. The mainstream media got sucker punched. I was in Washington, and Stephanopoulos called me, and they happened to be in Washington. They're getting ready to fly up New Hampshire, and there's a rumor, and he said, it just sounds real. Why don't you come on up there with us in the plane? So we went up in the plane, and then this woman, I guess I'd call her, had this press conference. And
did y'all watch it?
No, I didn't watch it. But we called in, and the media started picking up the story. And at that time, and actually, Mrs. Clinton was in Georgia campaigning with Governor Miller, who is my client also. And as soon as they found out about it, they said that they wanted to get out front of it. They wanted to explain to the American people what their marriage was about and what they were about, and they didn't want Star or any of these supermarket tabloids doing it for them, and that's where the decision was made to go on 60 Minutes. We got together with the 60 Minutes people, and on Sunday morning of the Super Bowl, they taped an interview in
How much input did you have into A, Clinton's message, how he articulated his answer, and B, for him to go on 60 Minutes, which was a bold move? It could have sunk you in the water.
Well, I think it was. He's going to do. He made those decisions himself. I thought they were wise decisions and added my voice to it, but I think that right away, both he and Mrs. Clinton did not want other people characterizing what they were about, and so that's why they decided to do that, and I think the American people understand that.
Did you think that at the time that he could overcome those blows?
Yeah, then.
I had doubt.
Yeah, well, I had doubt along the way, too, sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people did. But, when I really sort of picked up, we ran second in New Hampshire. And the scaredest I was the day of the Georgia primary. I left the afternoon in New Hampshire about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon when it's clear from it. Now they have these exit polls. You see them, we get them during the day. So there's no excitement left on election night unless it's a really close election. You already know at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon what's going to happen. Actually, before that. And so I said, look, y'all stay here. I'm going to fly down to Georgia because if we don't win the Georgia primary, we've had it. And also I'd had the governor was on the day that Paul and I went to work for Governor Clinton. Governor Miller said, well, if they for Clinton, I'm for him too. So I felt like I had a real obligation to him. So I went down there, and I don't go through the history, but we had lost the South Dakota primary, and the Saunders people were talking about they'd win Colorado, Maryland, and run a close second in Georgia. And if we'd have done that, I think that would have happened. We would have been doomed. But as it turned out, I think we got 63% of the vote in Georgia. And I think that was then we went on to Illinois and Michigan. But we still had sort of a tough time. And then about June, things started to turn around a little bit, and people would tell me, you know, James, what thing I really like about your guy is no matter what happens to him, he's always up, he never gets angry, he smiles, he plows ahead, he's very determined. And I think over a period of time, and I think that's one of the fortunate things about presidential elections is that people get a chance to observe somebody, just like I had a chance to observe someone over a period of time. And they say, you know, that guy's pretty tough. He can hang in there. And people understand the presidency is a tough office. You have to make tough decisions. And, you know, they just don't sympathize a lot with, you know, you just stick your hat in the ring, and that's a lot of people trying to knock it out on you.
James, I want to tell our friends that if they think that that part of the James Carville sag is intriguing, I haven't dropped the atom bomb yet. Along the way, as you are taking over running this presidential campaign for the Democrats, you meet a young lady in Washington, D.C. Her name is Mary Matalin. She's very lovely, but she's not just any young lady. Tell us a little bit about who Mary Matalin is.
Well, actually, the story is first. I think it's the first time I've ever told this story. In 1990 in Georgia, a producer for one of the networks, who was a friend of mine, called me and said, "You have to meet this woman, Mary Matalin," and she's the chief of staff of the Republican National Committee. I said, "Oh, okay, you know, so I cross-pollinate," and so I called her a couple times, and you know, just busy and call you back, and didn't, kind of typical sort of Washington, you know, well, it's not in now, but she's in a meeting, call you back, and you know, so whatever. And we went to a first time that we went out, we went to a dinner party at a friend of mine's house named Bob Truman. It was a sort of bipartisan thing. It was Congressman Gephardt and his wife Jane, they just is fine of people, and Bob Novak, the conservative columnist, was there with his wife, and so it was a real sort of bipartisan thing at Bob Trump's house. Was actually Senator Kennedy's speechwriter, was a good friend of mine, and we started dating. That was in early 1991, and then through the Wofford race, and of course, but there's been nothing like what it's like being polar opposites in a presidential race, and she's one of the 2 or 3 most influential people in the Bush campaign. She's a political director.
Now, before I ask this next question, get this, folks. You've got this couple who are in love. They're an item. James Carville, who's writing and coming up with most of these terrible things that Clinton is saying about
What
Bush.
about all the bad things Bush is saying
I'm
about
about to say. And Mary Matalin, who's writing most of the terrible things that Bush is saying about Clinton. Now, here's our question. Inquiring minds want to know, if you'll pardon the National Enquirer, how much stress has that kind of thing put on y'all's relationship?
Some. I mean, there've been some difficult times, but you know, look, it's possible to be devoted to 2 different employers and then be devoted to each other. I mean, you know, look what's happened in this world, and I think at large extent because of the failed economic policies of the Republican Party. I had to get one partisan dig in. I promised I wouldn't do that, but at any rate, no, because of whatever circumstances, not to be partisan. More and more, the sort of family where one parent could work and the other one could stay home and sort of do things is gone. And it's inevitable, as that would happen, you would have 2 different people work for 2 different television stations, 2 different banks, insurance companies. And
well,
it was just
not quite, but sounds good. But
the
not
law
quite,
averages
folks.
had to be that you know, presidential election is the most public of all events we have in the country, and so we ended up on both 2 sides of the presidential race. But it's had its difficult moments, but I think we're both pretty optimistic.
Do y'all discuss politics at all?
Try not to. It's pretty hard not to get a dig in, you know.
They're both warriors, you understand.
Yeah, we try to kind of skirt around. I mean, we did before the campaign, but during the campaign we try to skirt around it as much as possible. But sometimes
honestly, now, we're not going to tell anybody, but 4.5 million Louisianans. Has she hung up the phone on you a couple of 2 or 3 times with your little digs?
A couple, 2 or 3 times, probably gotten cut short. Yeah, I probably hung up the phone on her a couple of 2 or 3 times too. It's pretty intense business out there. I mean, it's a you know, people, you want to win. I mean, you're fighting pretty hard and you believe in what you do. I mean, I think she really is devoted and believes in George Bush, and I know that I'm devoted and believe in Bill Clinton, and that's part of American tradition. Heck, how many times you heard about couple getting, two honorary people getting in a horse and buggy and going 20 miles to cancel each other's vote? We just carry that on.
Incidentally, folks, she's as articulate and bright as James Carville. So together, it's like watching, I don't know, a terrible debate. It's really something.
Better looking at me, I'll tell you that.
Oh, my gosh. Now, James, what is your job of a chief strategist for the presidential campaign? What is your job?
Well, I think sometimes the title of the appellation here is a lot loftier than the job, but what we try to do is get the strategy set for the campaign, and I think here we know what it's about. American people know what it's about. Can we afford 4 more years in the same direction we're going? Do we need change or more of the same? It's about the economy. But every day you have to go out and make decisions relative to what television spots you're going to run, the types of events that you're going to have, what the schedule is like, and the debates and all of the things that go on.
Tell us what a typical day is for you. Say what
every
tomorrow.
Day.
We filmed this on a Wednesday. What's tomorrow going to be like? Thursday.
So Thursday, I will get up at 6:15. I will go down. I stay in the Capitol Hotel in Little Rock. I will go down and have breakfast, and I will read the USA Today, the Dallas Morning News, the Wall Street Journal, and the Arkansas paper. I'll scan those. I'll go in at 7 o'clock. We have a meeting, and they have an all-night crew in the headquarters. They have probably 4 or 5 people there, and they brief you on everything that happened the night before. They'll say these articles in the morning paper. We have people faxing, getting the papers from around the country. Then we have state people that fax in reports from the different states. This is what's happened here. Then you get briefed, and this is what happened. These are the polls that are out. This is what our stuff shows, okay? Then you go through that. Then you have what you call a Bush watch desk, and they'll get up and say, Bush is going to be today. He's going to be in New Jersey, and he's giving a speech to some parents of Catholic school children and doing whatever. And then he's going to be over in Pennsylvania at a steel mill, and he's going to be giving a talk on this, and Quayle's in Texas, and he's going to be at the Alamo doing something else. And then Gore's going to be in Louisiana, where as we film and shooting this today, he is, and Governor Clinton's in Florida addressing the Association of Retired People or whatever, for an example. So then we sort of try to set the day, and we have somebody, we have probably 6 TVs, and we can pick up satellite coordinates, so I can sit there and sort of watch the presidential campaign as it unfolds. In addition to that, we have a machine that gets all of the wire services, that provides us with all the transcripts of anything that the candidate says. So we're looking for sort of breaking news, way to put a news spin on it. We'll talk to the people on the road, and this is what's up today. This is what they'll be asking about. This is the line of the day. Then we have a surrogate department. They'll call out, and these are today we're pushing. In fact, today, just so happened like today, we're pushing welfare reform, governor's program at 2 years and job training and
how much access do you have to Governor Clinton?
Well, but generally we'll speak to him. It depends on the situation, but generally once a day, or sometimes more. It depends on where he is. Somebody will call in. It varies, but if you need him, you can. We're the campaign. You can. What
percent of the time are you on the road, and what percent of the time are you?
I'm almost in the headquarters. And during the primaries in New Hampshire, I moved there. I moved to Georgia. I was in Illinois for the whole thing. I was on the road, probably half the time, maybe better, 2/3 the time. All of the big primaries, I would move out to where they were. Now, because of sort of running the strategic end of the campaign, I spend almost exclusively in Little Rock. And then we go through that. Then we have a meeting at 6:45 where you show the tapes from the nightly news, and then try to set what the agenda is going to be for the next day. And then you have some sort of meetings after that. Then I'll go run. I run every day and go to supper about 9 o'clock and
How
try
quick
to get a
do
good
you
night's
get
sleep.
bad news, James?
Oh, about a nanosecond. It's the fastest traveling thing in America. Let me tell you, man. If you
Now, do you have to, when you write a response to something that's happened or that's happening, do you have people that you have to clear it through or with or anything?
We're pretty good. We're able to. We had a response when President Bush. We got a copy of his acceptance speech at the Republican convention. We had a response out before he was finished. But we know after one of the advantages, I mean, again, you got a George Stephanopoulos there. Like I say, he's been with the governor since, I think, October 1st, who's brilliant. And we got some pretty smart folks that know the governor's positions, okay? And we run it by the road, but some of the stuff is, a lot of it is just, most all of it is articulating a previously stated position. We wouldn't say anything for him that was new, but we know what his position is on a given issue.
Do you work with Mrs. Clinton at all?
Yes.
What kind of person is she?
Lawyer, bright. And again, a really nice, a really formed person. She's smart. I mean, of course, I like a lot of things because she's been very, the only time that she ever calls is she's only fussed at me one time, and that's about the governor being tired. And she said, "I'm tired of it. Y'all are exhausting him. I'm tired of people at the headquarters moving around the country. He's tired, he's exhausted, and it's got to stop, and I want him to have some time off." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And we got some more time off. That is the only time that I have ever, that she has, if you will, sort of interjected herself to call the headquarters. She's very bright. She has very good political judgment. If you call and ask her opinion on something, she'll give it, and it's generally sort of, it's right on target. She knows obviously knows what his feelings are, and it's always a good sounding board sometimes to ask her, well, how do you think the governors would react to this? And she'll say, well, if you change this and that,
is he a man of temper? Have you seen him lose it much?
No, if he ever loses it, he'll get aggravated, and he'll give you sort of a string of something, and it's usually he's not the best morning person in the world. But no, he's not.
How does he cope with the pressure, James, which must be monumental and full time?
I think he grew up, his dad died before he was born, and his mother had to go to work, and he grew up with his grandparents, and then she remarried, and his stepfather was an alcoholic and was abusive. And I think he's had to cope with a lot in his life, and I just don't, the other thing is I don't really he has said it, and, I know he wants to win, but he said, look, if I lose, I'll go back to a place that I really like. You got to remember this about Governor Clinton. Here was a man who was Georgetown Foreign Service School, a Rhodes Scholar, Yale Law School, who went back to Arkansas, but he loves that state. He was all excited. My mother and sisters went and took a vacation in Arkansas, and, he got the map out and said, oh, here, this is the third cleanest lake. I mean, he's very, and he always teases people and said the reason he hired me because he didn't want to be the biggest redneck on the campaign. So to some extent, we say sometimes, you can take the guy out of Arkansas, you just can't take the Arkansas out the guy.
Now, folks, James has in his left lapel a pin that looks right out of the Ninja Mutant Turtle. It is a kind of a green Star Trek type pin. I hope the camera has it here. I'm going to, in the name of goodness, have y'all got it? No? Yeah, there it is. In the name of goodness, what is that peculiar pin?
That's what you call a don't shoot button. That's it. So the Secret Service knows that you're on the governor's staff. And so, in particularly somebody like me, who he might be in Baton Rouge, and then they'll have Treasury agents from New Orleans, okay, who don't know. The people I travel with him all the time would know me, but I'm not on the traveling party. So if I walk up to him and whisper in his ear, they know that. Or he
don't shoot, folks.
Don't shoot, folks.
James, when this is all over and this parade, as we know, finally draws to an end, and the bunting and the confetti and the flags are put away, and the verbiage is to a great extent forgotten, and the personalities go back to reality and normalcy, which a presidential campaign, based on your description, certainly is not. What is James Carville, what's next for you? What do you want to do with your life? And please don't say you want to come back to Louisiana in the public relations business. please don't do that.
I think that I like politics. I want to stay in it in some way or form, somewhat in electoral politics. I may want to teach. I may want to do some writing or thinking, or might want to be a pundit. I don't know. I mean,
how about the lecture circuit, which looks like you and Mary Matalin would be an absolute natural, a unique natural, giving both sides of the coin.
I don't. That's sort of up to her. But it's something. I don't know. I think I'm way too Catholic to think past this election. You know what I mean? I think if I think past this, that's bad luck. I'm not going to jinx myself by thinking beyond early November.
When will you know whether or not you all are going to win? I'm just curious. When can you let me
know?
Well,
I don't know. There's certain points that you kind of know things, but if it's a close election, I may not know. I'll probably find out when everybody else does, you know, waiting for the last state to come in on election night. If it's a blowout, you'll have a pretty good idea earlier.
A couple of technical questions. How many people work out of the headquarters in Little Rock?
One of my favorite quotes is they asked Pope John how many people at the Vatican work, and he said about half. I think we got like 250 to 300 people there.
That's it.
And then you got people in there all over the state. You have, I can't tell you people what it takes to move people around, advance people. I mean, when he comes through, the amount of work that goes into, they asked me, the Gore people called me and said they were looking for a small town around Baton Rouge to do an event. And so I said, well, you know, Clinton, St. Francisville, Plaquemine, White Castle,
sure,
you know, Walker, you know, and so they got to send people out before he comes and look at it and see how it would look and how far it is and time it from the airport. And then he's got to get there. Then you got to build a crowd. You got to look at the visual. And they're people they're probably 25 Clinton Gore employees in Louisiana right now. And the governor's got a trip coming up. There's probably 6 people operating out of a hotel room right now and talking to Senator Breaux and talking to people and looking at different sites and, you know, getting everything together. So it's an enormous operation.
Tell us a little bit. How much polling do y'all do, and how much attention do you pay to polls?
Well, I mean, I'll go ahead and look at them every
night.
Pretty good, huh? You like to be ahead if you can. But I think we know pretty much. I mean, we know what we have to do. It's just hard to get out there and do it sometimes. Just like football coach saying, all you got to do is just block. When you're on offense, block the other guy. Then when you're on defense, tackle him. I mean, you know what your mission is.
So how much polling do y'all do? How constant is it in a president?
You know, you're polling and you're out there, you know, fairly often. I wouldn't want to tell you the exact time, but it's not daily, but it's enough that we know what's going on.
Is the security of the Secret Service very intrusive in a campaign?
I think at first the governor he didn't like it. In New Hampshire, it was a whole different experience. There were only 135,000 Democrats, I think, that vote in New Hampshire. And you just would walk up, and it was a lot of what we call retail politics, if you will, sort of hand to hand, voter to voter, shaking hands, talking to people. Now, some of our crowds get up 40, 50,000 people. And then it's all the TV stations and everything, and you give a speech, and if you go to, okay, it's 40,000 people. How many times, in all honesty, hands can a presidential candidate shake? I think these bus tours, which were David Wilhelm's idea, really captured something different in a presidential campaign, that people were out there and able to see something different.
How about a word on the press?
You know, I like reporters. I mean, they have a job to do. I don't always agree with how they do it. I think that I don't want to defend them in everything that they do, but I would say that most reporters that I know or try to do a good job. Most of them are honest. Oftentimes, and some you know, they mess up, and I'll call them and complain about it. And sometimes they'll say that you're wrong, and sometimes they're like the rest of us. They're human. They make mistakes. I just don't think that people. I don't think people look at the press and they look at people like me and on presidential campaigns as big people. They don't want this race to be about me. They don't want it to be about the media. They want it to be about them, their future, their lives. And they don't want candidates out there fighting with the press every day. They want them fighting for them and laying down a marker and say, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? How's this going to make my life better?
James, I'll make you a sporting proposition.
Okay.
If this campaign is successful and Governor Clinton is elected president, I'm personally going to host a giant testimonial dinner for you with speeches and plaques, pans, and trophies. If, on the other hand, President Bush is successful, let's do lunch.
Okay, I appreciate it. Just thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Louisiana Legends is made possible by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana. This important program series enables us to discover, through the accomplishments of our fellow Louisianians, the unique character of a state so proudly served by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana for 60 years.